Okay, we're live. We're good to go.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. So, welcome to the latest episode of The Best of Time, The Worst of Times. We have a really exciting guest this week that we've been buzzing about since we managed to persuade you to come and join us.
I mean, was that like 1-2 pints?
It took a couple of pints. Couple of drinks, but we managed to get him over the line. So, we're joined by Jon Hendry-Pickup, the CEO of Butlins.
Good afternoon, folks. It's nice to see you both.
Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for joining us.
So, Jon, welcome. So, first of all, can we just get a quick pitted history of your career so far and where you are now and what you're doing?
So I've worked for, I was going to say 25 years, but it's probably closer to 30 now, in retail and consumer businesses. So I started out after university as a consultant from West Inns, but then I moved into food retail quite quickly after that. Yeah. I worked for Aldi and I worked for Tesco in the UK and in Europe and China and in the US for a little bit. And then post then I was the COO for Travelodge. Then I ran Prezzo as the CEO there. And then more recently at Butlins.
Wow. And it is Prezzo, not Prezzo.
Well, right? I remember having a conversation on the way in with my son, and loads of people call it Prezzo. But he said, in the knowing way that you can do when you know everything and you're certain of everything at 19, he said, well, it's obviously Prezzo, isn't it? I'll tell you what. He said, well, you don't say pizza, do you? I'm like, yeah, okay.
It's true.
Yeah, he's right.
Yeah,
but
annoying and right.
I'm still going to call it Prezzo.
It was an Instagram campaign at one point. Do you say Prezzo? Do you say Prezzo? It was fine.
Oh, was it really?
That's
okay.
Genius. Actually, yeah.
Fab. And so Butlins is really exciting for me. Butlins was part of my childhood, as it is for many people.
I think everyone has that story, don't they?
Yeah.
For most people, yeah.
Yeah, it's a, I don't want to use the word heritage brand, but it's a brand which has heritage.
No, absolutely.
It's a good solid British brand.
And that's something I've always been quite keen on. So if you look at the places that I've worked, Tesco, Travelodge, Butlins, I like mass market stuff. I like British brands. I'd be no good at a Louis Vuitton type place. It's not really my gig. I'm from Blackpool, for God's sake. So that sort of thing works well for me. And that bit about everyone has a story, it's really true. Because even yesterday, we did some charity work with a charity called Deborah, and the patron of Deborah is Graham Souness. And talked to Graham Souness.
He was doing his cross-channel thing, wasn't he?
Yeah, that's right. Amazing, incredible, moving story. If you get a chance to have a look at what he does,
sure.
He's a brilliant, active patron for that charity. And even he had a Butlins story. He said, "I won the beautiful bodies competition for under 10s, which you'd never get to do now, obviously."
Yeah.
And then he talked about a donkey that kicked his leg that might have ended his football career and was considering whether he was going to sue me or not. So, but it's brilliant. You see those stories of people whose friends, family, grandma, whatever, it happens all the time, and it's a really nice, joyful thing when you listen to that.
So, did you go there when you were younger?
From Blackpool, there was the only Butlins hotel was in Blackpool. It's now the Metropole Hotel, but that was there. I even worked in Pontins for around the corner for a bit. Was one of those there. So I guess just the British seafront has been something that I've literally grown up with. So yeah, it's just part of what we all did.
So it's part of, the UK's got a very large coastline. I think they've sort of said that actually it's one of the longest in the world for the island because it's so craggy.
Sure.
But it is something that we should be proud of.
Absolutely.
Here. Yeah. And are you sort of seeing now that we've gone through COVID and the staycations back, are you kind of seeing that this is something that's going to grow in the next few years? More people travelling to the British coast, and not just Brits, but maybe people coming from overseas.
I think British people vacationing in the UK is definitely on the up. But then again, so is travel as a whole. So both travel from the UK overseas is growing, and travel within the UK by British people is growing. I don't know about the inbounding bit because everyone goes to London, and it's such let's face it, it's the world's global city, so the draw of there is massive. But from the point of view of us as Brits going on holiday in the UK, I think we saw that during COVID when we couldn't go anywhere else. And I think a number of people have seen that now as a decent option for what it is that they do. And you see see a lot of people who do both, and that's really comfortable for us. So we've got a number of people who have their main family holiday in Spain or in France or something like that, and then they'll do shoulder breaks, so October half term or May half term with us for 3 or 4 days, and that works really well. We're happy with that. At the moment, Brits spend about 52 billion a year on holidays, and 4 out of every £5 goes overseas, and I'm really sad about that, and I'd like people to spend a bit more time in the UK because we've got loads to offer.
Yeah, a bit more of your fair share of that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's us within that, but there are loads of different reasons for going to the coast. People who come to us go for a particular break type, which is very much all action days and nights, but loads of people go to the coast because they want to relax and explore, they want to get away from it all. And I think the UK has got a real opportunity to do any of those things.
So it kind of think we're sat here nodding and agreeing with that, because if you look at the coast, it seems to have, and the whole British holiday vacation, we're going American or UK here, but it does feel that actually we've managed to shed that old image of it being, kiss me quick hats and little handkerchief like hats and all that, and like the string vest, and now it's actually become quite a nice experience, almost a bit national trusty in the way you can go and have a nice walk at any time of the year or spend time on the beach. God knows the summers are getting warm enough here, aren't they? So is this something that you're doing as well with Butlins? Because it's still sort of very much part of our history and heritage. Well, it's yours, but we kind of, as Brits, we all feel we've got part of it.
Remember, it was only, I think it was the mid-80s when Blackpool stopped being the busiest tourist resort in Europe.
Really?
Which is mad when I looked at it. I think it's 84, something like that. So therefore, we've always had a tendency towards British people going on British holidays by the coast. And whilst there are some really beautiful areas of the coastline and there are some quite posh places to go, I think there's also a range for everybody. And from our perspective and what we do with Butlins, we're still very proudly mass market, and you see that with the towns as well. So when you look at Bognor, when you look at Skegness, when you look at Minehead, those are places that are accessible for everybody. And certain people might classify it as the Kiss Me Quick and the donkeys and all of that type of stuff, but it is a traditional seaside type of venue.
Well, yeah.
That brings me on to a question that I wanted to ask you. We were having a chat a few weeks ago, and one of the things I observed, and I didn't have to look that hard to see it, was that you seemed resolutely clear on what Butlins is and what it stands for, and that you're not going to allow that to be deviated from. So we are Butlins, don't you ever dare forget it. This is what we are. Brilliant. So let's go and be brilliant at that, which was like, fantastic. But my thought then was, has it ever been thus? Have you always had, or has the business always had that clarity of vision in your time?
It's a really great question. It was one of the things that I wanted to understand very clearly, first of all, when I got there. And it's not just an intuitive thing, although I think when you talk about it, it becomes quite obvious and quite common sense that that's what we're about. But it definitely wasn't at first. And I think over time, 90-year history of the business, you're going to get periods of time where things are great and things are not great. And Billy, when he started the business back in '36, was a real visionary, and he was a risk taker, and he was an entrepreneur. So he was the first guy to bring dodgems to the UK. He had the first commercial monorail that customers were able to use. If you look at where his learnings came from, it came from Canada and his life there about what a seaside resort for families ought to look like. And he was a brilliant marketer as well. So his slogans around things like a week's holiday for a week's wages back in the late 40s was very clearly focused on, this is a clear message, it's accessible, it's things that you can do, it's aspirational. And I think he had a very clear understanding about what he was trying to do with Butlins. I think over time that probably varied and probably changed, and some of it was environmental. So you look at cheap package holidays to Europe, that became a big thing in the 70s and the 80s in particular, and I don't think that Butlins or many other seaside locations companies, towns even, were able to deal with that so well. I think that started to come back. But from our point of view, when I first got there, I really wanted to understand what is Butlins about, and what Billy stood for was very clear. What the business stood for at the time wasn't so obvious to me, because I saw a few contradictory things that sat within there. And so we did a very detailed mission-based segmentation. So it was a load of quant work followed by some qualitative work as well, to try to make sure that we were clear on what the size of the market was, what it was that we stood for, what we had permission to do from our guests, what they didn't want us to do. And so as a consequence of that took about 9 months worth of work. It got us to a really clear point of understanding, both for family breaks and for the big weekenders, what guests wanted and what they didn't want. So that made it much, much easier to be very confident with what we stood for.
And when you had that clarity, was the outcome to... It was obviously clearly to focus on what you do well. Yeah. Was one of the outputs of that to stop doing some stuff that you shouldn't be doing?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
And some of that was the prior management team who looked after the business. And I sort of understand this, had been deflected a bit by, right, what are we going to be about? And it's quite hard exercise to reconcile that when you've gone the wrong way for a while. I think they also got a bit distracted by Centre Parks, which is understandable, because Centre Parks is an excellent business. It's an adjacency. It's not a direct.
It's similar but different, right?
Absolutely right. It's a UK short stay break, but so are many things, and they do something quite different with their mission, which is why I wanted to make sure we focused on mission rather than on demographic, because I think demographic is a bit retro, is quite dated, and definitely has limitations now. Now that we have perfect information through internet and so on, the way people behave is not the same as what it used to be, based on whether you were white collar and you drove a particular type of car, you always did these things. It just doesn't happen anymore. So we definitely stopped doing things that were demographic based, and we focused very much on the mission type of the people who were coming. We definitely stopped doing things that were about premiumisation, which had been what was happening around the focus on Centre Parks. So team previously had premiumised a bunch of accommodation, they'd premiumised some of the restaurants, but the guests hadn't given us permission for any of that. I actually had a conversation internally at one point where somebody said, we've built the restaurant for the guests that we want to come, not the ones.
I was about to say, stop building a product that the senior leadership team would appreciate, right?
And lots of businesses, certainly consumer-facing businesses, make that mistake, because as a senior leadership team, people are not necessarily their demographic. And if you're a mass market product, you need to make sure you understand that and what that is about.
So we saw this with other businesses in the UK. So Gatwick Airport is probably a real similar example, the only one that I can think of that's this close. And when they were refurbishing the airport some years ago, maybe over 10 years ago, they'd had an interim COO, and he decided that he wanted all the retailers to be premium, high-end, luxury brands, etc. And then the management team changed, and these guys came in and said, look, they exactly what you said. They were building for customers they would like to have, but ultimately we don't have that many business class passengers. We're a holiday airport, and people want the regular news stores and food stores, and they want to be quick. And then you get the business types that just want to get through in the shortest space possible. So
it's not Five Guys, it's Burger King, it's not Franco Manca, it's Pizza Hut. Well, it's the populist view.
And it is interesting.
Rather than the aspirational one.
Yeah, right. And it's that knowing your mission rather than your demographic. To arrive at that point, to know that you're focused on your mission and clearly the customer, there's got to be some learnings along the way in your career there. So we call the podcast Best of Times, Worst of Times. And the reason for that, John, is that Dave and I figured out that some of the worst things that happened to us in our careers previously were dreadful at the time, but actually that was what later became one of the great things, one of the best learnings that we had. Knowing your focus on the customer and this refreshing notion towards vision, I think, or the absolute. What were the worst of times, or a worst of time for you that looking back now is quite good and shaped this thinking?
So there are a couple of bits that come to mind. One was about me and what I did, and one was about somebody that I worked for and how I respond to that. So the first one was early days. I worked at Aldi. It's a great business, growing very quickly. I still think it's a fantastic business now, and I got promoted quite quickly. And at the time, the business was expanding rapidly, so those sort of things happened. but I was definitely into a role earlier than I was ready for, and as a consequence, I think I approached it in totally the wrong way, and I made loads of mistakes, and I got a ton of things wrong, pretty much everything wrong. I think if I look back on that first period of time, and if I'd written a list of all the things that I ought to do wrong, I think I probably did all of them.
Yeah.
And some of that's experience, some of that's ego, some of that's trying to demonstrate how great I am at what I'm doing, and that went really wrong. And the difficulty is when you do that in a high profile role, which is what I was doing at the time, then it's quite difficult to come back from that when it's obvious that you've got stuff wrong. And I didn't really. It was unfortunate, because then I curtailed my trajectory in the business, and that probably was the start of the end of my time there. So I think the key learning from me from that perspective was, when you're putting somebody in a role, you've got to set them up for success. You've got to make sure they're ready to do that. You've got to test that quite hard, and you've got to stay close to them when they're in that role first of all, even if it's in quite a senior position. So I learned a lot from that about how I approach things in the future, how I worked with the team that I had, and my approach to them as well, because that was very much, I know all the answers, I'm going to lead from the front, I'm going to tell you all what to do. It never works well, particularly when you're 25 and you don't really know a lot. So that was that one, and I think that the second one that really stuck with me for a while was that it felt to me for a period of time I was working for somebody who was new into the business that I was in, who I really didn't gel with. And there are people that I've worked with in the past where we all have different personalities, and we haven't always been best mates, but we've figured out a way to work together, and this was very difficult because we didn't. And I think because we're not sociopaths generally, then you worry about these things. You worry if there's something wrong with you. There's something that, am I really any good at what I'm doing? Do I know anything about what I'm doing? For a period of time, that caused a lot of sleepless nights. And I think that learning as well about, making sure that you're able to check yourself and check in with people that you trust about what you're doing, and being confident enough in discussions to say, look, this is what I'm experiencing with the person that you're working for, is really important. And also, and this is easy to say, difficult to do at times when job security is probably worse than it's been before. If it's not working for you and you're unhappy, I think it's quite important to check out and move.
Completely agree.
And have the confidence to do that.
That's kind of tricky when, I think certainly for when you're younger as well, isn't it? Because we've got this notion that we should be making a life where we go off and we buy houses and cars, and even in the gig economy, everything is all about income and moving up, and that's kind of tricky. But then, I don't know, the point comes where you suddenly do think about things that, your work life does matter. We talk about work-life balance, but exactly as you said there, it's when do you take all those learnings and apply them in a way where actually you can really enjoy your work. And you're right, John, I think we all know people that we just generally wouldn't get on with. But it doesn't mean they're bad at their job or we're bad at our job. Sometimes it just doesn't gel, and you have to recover from that, right? So
you can't help it. If you're somebody who tends to have a bias for action and you're accountable for the stuff that you do, you automatically take that type of thing personally, and that was very hard. Yeah. And it took a little while to get my head around the fact that sometimes this stuff just happens. The advice that you give other people when it's obvious from the outside, you don't necessarily take well yourself. When you're giving it to yourself. So
it's always so much easier externally.
But it's that moment, and I think a lot of people get it. It tends to come later in life with wisdom and old age and having been around the block a few times. But I think you realise the value in things isn't in what you get; it's in what you do. Right? It's the doing. It takes a while to realise that the watch and the car and the house are largely inconsequential.
You move through that into... I don't think that's just necessarily an age thing. I think we've seen it post-global financial crisis about how people consume stuff in their lives. There was a big shift at the time away from people prioritising spending on things and instead spending on experiences. So you see it again now.
Yeah. Okay.
The extreme post... the recent batch of inflation that we've had is that during a cost of living crisis, the holiday comes first, and then I might buy the fridge or I might change the car or something like that. So how people spend time with their friends or their family or whatever it happens to be has remained a real focal point for most families and most individuals.
Yeah, it's to resonate with that. We see that over on supply chain, and particularly around global trade at the minute. So, well, everyone thinks it's always got to be cheaper and quicker, which is something Dave and I talk about a lot. Actually, we're beginning to see a bit more conscious spending, I think. So even though we have a cost of living crisis, and you're right, we see people spending the money on experiences, even when they are making an item purchase, they're being a lot more considered on that, and cheapest doesn't always win. Right. So I think that's actually probably a little bit too early to say, because it's 2023, we're coming into Christmas, and things are still pretty tight for many people.
Absolutely. But
it is probably a strong indicator of where society's at now and for the next 5 years, which is only going to be good for Butlins. And
the nice thing is, with what we do, I see a lot of conversations around how people are changing their spending patterns, what happens next with digital retail versus physical retail, and how that's going to evolve. Where's AI going to come into this, and what's that going to do to things? From our point of view, something that will always stay in place is that people value their leisure time, and where we get our highest scores is when people mention and comment on the interaction they have with some of our team, and that matters a lot. So that's making memories, that level of interaction that they have is something that sticks with them, and you're not going to AI that out. I wouldn't have thought. This might not age well, because there may be a solution.
But
physically being on holiday.
If that's been developed afterwards, then what a prescient lack of observation John had.
It's true. It's like, so AI isn't the future, but probably speak to our internet overlords. But John, it's completely true, because I think if we look in the private equity markets right now, in the space where I'm sat right now, there's a lot of investment has been made into tech companies, but it's stopped. Particularly the AI buzz is now, in my mind, over, and they're all looking at infrastructure. That's the big thing: airports, seaports, holiday ports, and the gradual realization has now taken over that people don't live on data. We live on food and experiences and basic needs, clothing and things like that. So actually, the holiday, the downtime, becomes more important than ever. So AI is a tool that will help. But anyway, so interjection for myself. There is something I really want to ask. Have you got a question for me?
Just a quick one. So again, you were talking earlier on about accountability and responsibility. And I guess some people might meet you and think, well, you've got a job which is responsible for giving, I think, 19,000 people, when you're at full occupancy, responsible for giving them one of the best sets of memories that they're ever going to have. But they're also sleeping under your roof every night. Does that ever flash across your mind from a responsibility perspective, that you want to give everybody all this fun, but you also want them all to go home in the same shape that they arrived, albeit slightly lighter in the wallet, I imagine?
Yeah, I think so. Though nobody brings cash anymore, so weight doesn't. It can do, and the only reason I hesitate on that is because the danger is, if you think about scale, you end up talking yourself out of doing anything. Whereas actually, if I take the safety aspect of it first and foremost, which is the number one thing that we have to do before we do anything else, the best way to look at that is just per individual unit of things that we do. So for example, are we checking all of the fire doors? And have we made sure our PPM schedule works for the lifts, and things like that. So actually, from my point of view, on safe and legal, the things that we want to focus on are the bottom-up, moment by moment inputs. And if we get that right, if I know that we're spending time on those things, and I've got the level of expertise that we've got in the business who will manage that day by day, that gives me cause to actually sleep.
So you avoid the big events by having those micro interactions of the process all the time.
I think with safety, and certainly safety of infrastructure and safety of people, that's the critical way through, is to make sure that those individual, for want of a better description, boring do this tasks are actually in place. Then you can sleep. The only bit that gives me sleepless nights is when I don't know what's going on certain things.
Right.
And if I feel like I'm in the position where I'm not aware of whether we're doing things in the right way, that would worry me. And I don't have that with safety and infrastructure.
Okay,
it's actually really assuring to hear that. So I don't know if you've read the book that's recently been released about a top tier consultancy, and they talk about fairground rides in that, and they'd gone into these an amusement park, and they'd said, hey, we don't actually have these accidents on this roller coaster, so you don't need to check it 8 times a day. And they're like, that's the reason why we don't have accidents. So they made a recommendation to scale back and change shifts, and a year later what happens, there's a major fault which was nearly fatal. So so actually hearing that from your perspective, knowing that those are the kind of things that keep you up at night, I think if I'm going somewhere like that, on holiday in a hotel or even with an airline, this is really what you want people to be staying up for.
I was helping somebody structure their new monthly board meeting a few weeks ago, and they said, what functions do I need there? I clearly need finance there, and I need sales, I need marketing, I need operations.
AI,
I was like, okay, yeah. And I was like, where's HR? Where's health and safety? And they said, do they need to come? I'm like, no, they need to be the first thing on every agenda, because then they never get bumped. They never get, if they overrun, great. Nothing comes before that. And I was so pleased to see the agenda, and it was like, health and safety update, the numbers, the audit, all of that is the first half an hour of every single monthly board meeting. A, because it's important, B, it casts the right shadow, and it gets all of the senior leadership team understanding their respective responsibilities as well. But not everybody has that mindset. So
no, it's good. Yeah.
Your question.
So people that do watch this podcast know that David and I we've got a tendency to talk about gigs and musicians and bands and all that. So what I want you to do, John, is to tell us right here, right now, see what I did,
very good,
about All Back to Minehead.
So, that was a brilliant first experience, because I went to the first one that we did with Norman Cook last year.
So Norman Cook's Fatboy Slim, for those that don't know.
For those who don't know. Interestingly enough, that was it was a really stressful decision for our Ents and Leisure team, because previously on the same weekend we'd had a Madness Weekender for 10 years in a row, and that's a very specific audience. It had worked extremely well for us, and it had also probably run its course at that stage, and so we were looking at where to go next. And there's no obvious just look at Madness, they've been around for a while. Is there a younger, more contemporary version of Madness? Well, there isn't. They're pretty much a unique prospect. So we have to then look into the universe at, okay, so what's appropriate for us, what works, how do we make things happen, how do we also expand our audience, whilst at the same time not putting in something that's too niche. Because if we get these weekenders wrong, we're still paying for all of this. So you still pay for all of the team that are there, you still pay for the cost for the artists and the AV and
you can't take any cost out of it, right?
Absolutely not. Well, also if you put this out there and you market it and you get a 50% occupancy, well, you're in a bit of trouble. If you put it out there and it sells like Billy O, fantastic, then that goes well. So there was a degree of nervousness because we had nothing to compare this to in terms of what else we did anywhere else. So we were all sat quite worried when we put it on sale at first. And
was it a Friday morning 10 o'clock watching the numbers live,
refresh?
Okay.
It was a Thursday actually. But we put it out there in the morning, and our head of revenue, who's been with the business for a long time, was focused on this, and he said, okay, well, as long as we've done about 60,000 in sales by the end of the first weekend, we're probably okay. So from Thursday morning to the end of Sunday night, if we do that much in sales by that point,
that's your indicator of probably going to be all right.
Yeah. Because of the demand curves you've seen on other breaks, he thinks then we can probably make this work. So everybody's sat around looking slightly nervous, and then it clicked on, and then it clicked off again immediately, and then back on and then off again immediately. And we're like, well, what's going on here? And we did 60,000 in sales in about 35 minutes.
Wow.
Which is not Glastonbury pace, but from our point of view, I was like, amazing. So this looks like it's going to work. But interesting enough, we then see a pattern where further down the line, the demand was amazing at first, and it's from Norman's loyal audience.
Yeah.
And then the challenge is that hit a ceiling for us for a period, because he is quite specific, and it's not normally what we would do. So we then have a different challenge to face, which is a unique demand curve for this particular type of break, which we then have to figure through for this year. But of course, we managed to do that. He's been back there again this year. It's gone really well, and hopefully it'll become a good part of our repertoire.
So it sounds like in the space of about 30 minutes, you went from "I'm not sure we're doing the right thing" to rebook it for next year immediately, right?
Yeah, and that was the immediate conversation. What other things can we do that are of this same nature? But then within 4 weeks or so, we're going vertically in terms of sales, and then it stops. Because you've hit the audience that's very, very loyal to him. Then where do we go? And you have to then explore new territory, which we hadn't seen on other ones. So putting new things on is first of all vital, because you want to keep the innovation up. You want to keep stretching your audience to the right space. But also it comes with a whole set of risks and challenges that, we screw up a weekend badly because we put something on that that tanks, and we lose £500,000 in a weekend. And that's very difficult to recover.
And you're really right. So that lightning in a bottle thing's really interesting, especially with live music. So I won't name the band because people who know me will be able to figure it out. But we staged, we booked 4 nights across 2 weekends.
So when you say we,
band,
this was
at the HMV Empire in Coventry, music venue, and it was an exciting reunion. My God, they're back. We knew we could fill 4 nights, but there were reasons why we couldn't put the second 2 nights on. In that moment, we sold out the first night and the second night in about 6 minutes.
Wow.
And we could see the demand would have sold the third and fourth in the next 10 minutes, but we couldn't for 10 days. 10 days later, the zeitgeist had collapsed. The moment, the FOMO that I've got to moment had collapsed.
Right.
And so we never had the 4th show, but the 3rd show, which we could have sold out in 10 minutes, took about 9 months to fill.
Right.
Because we had missed that
FOMO.
that absolute key opportunity.
People are emotional beings, aren't they? They get excited.
You're going, we're going. Are you booking? We're going. You're going. Let's all go. We're all going, right? And then it's that almost buyer's remorse. Oh,
wish I'd gone
don't
now.
know. Or indeed,
So
it's not a priority.
It's funny actually. We did that recently. We were looking at an event over in the States at the Red Rock Stadium, and the tickets came on sale, and then we actually realised at the time the tickets, nothing about price, and I thought, we don't know where we're going to be living next year, so actually this might be a little bit premature. That said, and I think the name of your event, John, is genius. All back to Minehead is brilliant. That said, we have committed that whether we're overseas or not, or whether we're here, we're coming to Butlins that week. I am not missing Norman Cook.
Well, I'm delighted to hear that.
I've seen him live on YouTube. I'm not me personally. I've never seen him live, but when he was on YouTube, and he just looks like someone who really enjoys it. And if that's the spirit that Butlins is going to be now, that's great.
Yes.
I'll travel in for that.
You talk about accountability. He really brought himself to bear on that weekend. So a number of things, aside from being a really nice bloke, he was, he's delightful with the team. He was brilliant to be around. He also really committed hard to the weekend. So the first weekend he said, right, I want to DJ at some point over the weekend in every venue.
Brilliant.
So he has all these names that he DJs under. So he did that across every venue. So he DJed in the swimming pool at one point.
Amazing.
Because he did a pool party, so he DJed in there. But also, on the first day when we're doing our drive-through check-in and everybody's arriving, he stood in the check-in with the check-in team.
Brilliant.
Checking people in. He's done a letter for everybody for the room.
He owned it, right? Owned it.
Walked up and down and saw everybody, and his crowd are a lovely crowd. So he's out wandering through the resort, and somebody says, "Oh no, can I have an autograph on this picture?" So, of course. He has a chat with them because he does that. He talks to everybody. He's great. And signing this picture, and then suddenly everybody forms this orderly queue, signing it just in the middle.
No scrum.
no scrum. This is so super nice. You've got a load of these people who, rather than mobbing him, have just stood in a nice, polite line.
Brilliant.
But you go all the way back to that thing about more about the mission, less about the demographic. And I'm thinking about all the mates that I've got who'd want to go in there, married couples, we've got pilots, and we've got lawyers, and all sorts of people, and they just like one guy I know who owns a coffee shop. He'd love that. Him and his wife would be straight in there.
Yeah.
So,
and it's families as well,
because
right? I imagine you've got chalets occupied by families at these weekends where it's OG ravers with their kids and.
Well, they do. There are no little kids, so there's no.
No, but under 18, over 18,
over
sorry.
18s, absolutely. And people will go with their grown-up kids. And the nice thing. This is where the benefit of mission focus as opposed to demographic focus works, because we're a broad church. We get people from across the UK, and that's where we want to be. We want to be super accessible in what we do. We want it to be a brand for everybody. If you want to do that, and if your mission is, I want to be very outgoing, very sociable, all action, days and nights, loads going on. Let my hair down, not worrying about what it is that I'm doing or what anybody else is doing. Then we can do that, both with the big weekenders for music and darts and whatever else, Oktoberfest and all the other things that we do, and we can do it for families as well. But if you're somebody who says, you know what I like the Four Seasons, I like a cabana, I like somebody to deliver my food to my poolside, I like looking around and seeing what other super designer swimwear other people are wearing around the pool, and I can be a bit judgy on that. There's nothing wrong with that.
Go and find
There's no judgment from me on that. That's absolutely fine. People work hard for their money. They can do what they want, but we're not that.
No.
And nor will we ever be that.
No.
That's not what we're here to do. We do other stuff, and I think it's really important to understand what your doing list is and your not doing list is. You need to be able to write down. This is a list of great ideas, but we're not doing them. Or this is a list of stuff that you could do as part of your proposition, but that's not us.
Yeah.
We're over here and we're this. And the good thing from my point of view is part of that mission-based segmentation work that we did market sizing, and the market sizing for this is massive. It's it's $1.5 billion a year that people spend on these things, and we are. At the moment, on holiday sales, we're somewhere around 200 million. So therefore, for us to grow a bit, it doesn't mean we have to take over the whole market. The market will grow, we will grow. Happy days.
Brilliant.
So it's sensible.
Fantastic. So to round things off, we really want to get the measure of you. So all of that insight you've shared with us is all well and good, but we call these our smash hit questions. And the first one is, in your opinion, what's the greatest album of all time?
See, this is a really hard question because I think it applies to different people.
I think you should say Big Beach Boutique, Norman Cook.
Yeah, be careful. Who is it you want to book? Right?
For me, it's the first Stone Roses album because it had...
Excellent.
Two out of three.
Two out of three
podcasts
now,
recorded, 2 out of 3. So, correct answer is the Stone Roses first album. Well done.
So John Acton. John Acton, yeah.
It was a timing thing for me. I was 17 when that was about. I went to see them in. They were playing in the reception of Preston Guildhall, and Ian Brown kept bashing his head on those fake tiles that were. And there were only about 250 people there. And within what felt like 2 seconds, they were suddenly playing 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 venues. It was that year for me, and it stuck. And I still think it's a brilliant album.
Brilliant.
Absolutely amazing.
It is timeless.
He still can't sing.
He never could. But I totally agree.
It's funny actually. On the drive down here, I was listening to Ian Brown's "Fear." Probably the cleverest song ever made. Right?
Oh yeah, or the most simple. It's difficult to work out for sure.
Sorry. Okay.
Greatest movie of all time, in your opinion?
See, also super hard. My kids give me grief for this one, but the best movie ever made was The Exorcist.
Okay.
And just in terms of what they did with it and how they did it.
The original.
The 70s was an amazing era for psychological horror films, and you think about The Shining, and it was brilliantly done, and it changed the dynamic of how that genre worked. I'm not a big horror fan, but I just think that
it got you.
I talk to the kids about this, and they think I'm an idiot, but it's a brilliant film.
Cool.
So about TV, I mean, the one I always like is favourite TV series.
So I still think my favourite TV series, even though there have been some recently which have been brilliant, I still think my favourite TV series is The Wire.
Oh, okay, that's great. Good choice.
Which is excellent. I never got into The Sopranos. I know that probably makes me a minority because I've heard it's awesome.
I'm with you on that. I got halfway through season 2 and didn't quite gel.
Yeah. But The Wire I thought was brilliantly done, really, really fantastically done. I mean, even recently you see things like, I guess what challenges it for me is probably Succession. Which is spectacular. And you hate everybody, but you find yourself rooting for certain people because you hate them slightly less for
who's the least horrific of these people?
It's true. Every single one of them, and that's completely madness. But it's brilliant writing. So that's probably the closest I ever got to saying it's not The Wire, it's something else. And
final question from us, as somebody who you might not have thought about yourself in this way, maybe you have, but as one of the hosts of one of the most successful music event hosting guys in the UK these days, best gig you've ever been to?
So there are ones that are the most memorable. So I remember being at Whitley Bay Ice Rink to watch the Happy Mondays, which was absolute madness. And Donovan was supporting me.
I remember that tour.
But he was completely done for really at the time, and the audience were fine for like 30 seconds, then they got really bored. So that was probably the weirdest. I struggled to get past seeing the Rolling Stones, who I saw at the O2, and just the quality of their music. And even now, Mick Jagger's voice is so astonishing for somebody in their 70s. That level of resonance and the standard of what they deliver live, I just think is mind blowing.
Yeah,
they're almost impossible to beat, I think.
So you know, a very quick story, then I've got a dash. So Donovan has 2 daughters, and one of them married Shaun Ryder,
right,
and the other one married Paul Ryder. And so the statement has always been, to lose one daughter to the Happy Mondays is reckless, but to lose 2 is bloody careless, right?
Yeah. And it's not like, let's face it, looking at Shaun, he didn't age well, did he?
No.
He looks like something from Lord of the Rings these days.
Yeah, bit chaotic. John, thanks a million for joining us.
Brilliant,
really enjoyed it.
That was great. Yeah.
And
we're looking forward to 2024. All back to Minehead then. Minehead,
Count us in. Brilliant. Thanks, John.
Cheers, John.
Guys.